Today on America's Test Kitchen, Bridget shows how to make the best almond cake. Jack challenges Chris to a tasting of orange juice, and Julia makes the ultimate British-style currant scones. Right here on America's Test Kitchen.
Okay, go ahead and laugh, but in Europe, especially in Austria, some of the classics are back. Lederhosen for the men and dirndls for the women. What's also back is some of the classic European recipes, especially pastries, like a great almond cake. Of course, in Austria, they tend to make it with marzipan. It's like this. It's a little denser, sweeter, and richer. Of course, here in America, we have a long tradition of the lighter, fluffier yellow cake. So let's head into the test kitchen with Bridget, split the difference between Austria and America, and make an almond cake that even the Von Trapp family would love. You know, I have a lot of problems, as you know. Well, I can't decide whether I'm old world or new world.
Okay.
Like, some things old world I love. Like, I like the sort of dense marzipan almond cake. Mm-hmm. I like those little tiny cars. I like their coffee. I like their bread. But I like American things, too, like big cars sometimes. And I also like lighter cakes. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do old world, new world with an almond cake. Great almond flavor, a little bit lighter.
That's right, but let me give you a little bit of background on how those traditional cakes were made. Now, usually they started off with one of these two products. This is almond paste, and this is marzipan. Now, both of these are at least a 1-to-1 ratio of almonds to sugar. They're very, very sweet. We love to eat them, but all that sugar, all that moisture in there really makes for a heavy cake. And then we went on to almond flour. We thought, well, that'd be perfect. And there's usually very little flour in this to begin with. So this would basically take the place of almost all the flour and the almonds as well. But believe it or not, there isn't a lot of almond flavor in this. So we said, let's make our own almond meal, but before we do it, we would toast it. And that way it deepens their flavor. So what we ended up with is blanched sliced almonds. We're also going to use those sliced almonds on top of the cake. All
Got
right?
it.
So come on down, I'll show you how easy this cake is to make. And here is our almond. And you can toast nuts in one of two ways. In a large skillet over medium heat, you do want to shake it to make sure that they're toasting evenly. Or if you have a large batch, you can actually put them in a moderate oven, something like 300 degrees. You want to check it on every couple minutes until they're toasted. All right, and these are completely cooled. So we're going to go ahead and put these right into the food processor. Now, we have here 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. We've got 3/4 teaspoon of salt. We don't want the cake to be too sweet and one-dimensional. Now, here's where we're going to get some lift. This is a 1/4 teaspoon, just a smidge of baking powder. And then we have here 1/8 of a teaspoon of baking soda. Now, this isn't really being used here as a leavener. It's more for color because baking soda creates more alkali batter. Alkali batters brown faster and quicker. And that's going to become very important here in a moment. So put on the lid, and we're going to pulse this until it's really finely ground. It'll take 5, 10, maybe a few more pulses. You don't want to over-process it, though, because you'll over-process the almonds, end up starting to get a little bit of a fatty mixture. And I still see some large pieces in there, so I'll let this go a few more. All right, so let's get this out of the food processor and so you can better see the texture. Now, Chris, you can actually smell this. It smells like toasted almonds. And you can see this texture. It's really quite fine in places, but you still see little bits of the almond, and that was really pleasing to us in the final crumb of the cake. All right, let's move on to eggs. Now, we're not going to get out the standing mixer and beat the eggs until they're really whipped and foamy, which you would think would be a great thing to give some lift to this cake. And that's because the standing mixer just does too good of a job. It slowly unravels the proteins of the egg. You get this triple volume foam. We still want to create that foam. We want to get some air in here, but we don't want as much as a standing mixer. So we're going to use the food processor to do the same thing. And that's actually going to slice through the protein strands of the eggs. So we're going to get a little bit of foam in there, but not nearly as much as we would with a standing mixer. So again, 4 large eggs, goes right in. And 1 1/4 cup of sugar. All right, now a couple more flavors. We have a tablespoon of grated lemon zest. And now here's my little cheater ingredient, almond extract. Not a lot, it's 3/4 of a teaspoon. But this is what's really going to give it that marzipan or almond paste flavor. A little bit goes a long way. All right, so lid goes back on. And we're going to let this run for about 2 minutes. And you'll see that the color of the eggs, the sugar, it all turns a nice pale yellow. All right, so you can see that that is a nice pale yellow. There's some air whipped into that, but not too much, all right? So now we can add fat, and we're using 2 kinds. Of course, we're going to use butter, Of course, we're going to start with butter. And this is melted butter, 5 tablespoons of it. And the butter is going in there for flavor and richness, but we're also going to use vegetable oil. And between the butter and the oil, it's exactly the right moist texture that we're looking for. So the butter's going to add flavor and the oil is going to stay moist even as the cake bakes. This is a 1/3 cup of vegetable oil. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and put our almond mixture right back in there. And now we want to be careful about mixing this. We don't want to activate too much gluten. I'll put the lid back on, and then we're going to give it a few pulses, about 5, until the almond mixture is all mixed up. So into our 9-inch cake pan, and we went ahead and greased it and then lined it with parchment paper. We also want to add a nice topping to this. Traditionally, this cake just gets a little dusting of confectioner's sugar, but we're going to make a lemon sugar topping and also top it with toasted almonds. This is a 1/2 teaspoon more of the grated lemon zest. I'm going to plop that right into 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar and just work it together. All right, now before I place this on the cake, this lemon sugar mixture, I want to add more of those sliced almonds that we toasted. This is another 1/3 cup, same kind of almonds, blanched and sliced. Just evenly place it all over the top. And then lemon sugar goes right on. And then as this bakes, the lemon sugar is going to kind of form this crust, this really sweet crust that's on the top. All right, so it is time to put this in the oven. It's a 300-degree oven, which is pretty low, but that's why we added the baking soda to this. It's actually going to make this brown quicker and faster in such a low oven. Now, it's going to stay in there for a good 55 to 65 minutes, which is a long time, but that low oven combined with a longer heat means that this will bake evenly. All right, Chris, time to move on to the next step. Now, while you were away, I pulled the cake out of the oven and I tested it for doneness. I stuck a toothpick right in the center and it came out clean. So we know that this is good to go. All right, so this has been sitting here for 15 minutes straight out of the oven, and that is so that we can let it firm up. So now I need to invert it, but before I do that, I'm going to take a paring knife and run it right around the edge just to release it. There we go. And put another rack on top. It's greased. Flippity-doo-dah. All right. And then we say a quick prayer. And et voila.
Nicely done.
All right, so it's not over yet. I've got to re-invert it. So back over it goes. This time's a lot easier. So we're going to let this cool completely before we can eat it. Now, we could very easily eat that cake as is.
We could.
But we won't.
Right.
We're going to make a really nice creme fraiche that's flavored with orange. So it kind of mirrors that little bit of citrus that's in the cake. It's not going to overpower it. It's got a little bit of tang, a little bit of sweetness. All right, so we need 2 oranges, and I've already gone ahead and worked on the first orange that's in here, but let me show you what I'm going to do with the second one. We need a teaspoon of grated orange zest. Of course, we washed the oranges. And then we just run it up and down on the rasp grater. This is perfect because it just pulls off that outer layer of peel. So if you start getting much beyond the inner peel down to the white, it starts to get bitter. All right, so that looks good. I'm going to call that a teaspoon. What do you think, Chris?
I would call that done.
So next, you want to lop off the top and the bottom of the orange. So you've got a nice flat surface to work with. And now you can work with a chef's knife at this point. I actually like to keep with the paring knife and go around the orange, kind of curving the blade as I go around. And I want to take as much of that inner peel and the pith away because that's the bitter part. All right. Now I want to retrieve these segments from in between these 2 lines, the membranes. I actually hold it in my hand. I'm just really careful not to go down too far. And I'm angling the knife so that they come out in a perfect little triangle. All right, so I'll just work my way all the way around. Leave that membrane behind. All right, so now we want to chop these into 1/4-inch pieces. I'm going to return to my chef's knife here. And we don't need to be too exact about it. I'll just cut them in half lengthwise and then straight across. Into the bowl with the first one. All right, so let's get some more flavor in here. This is creme fraiche, a cup of creme fraiche, and we're using it instead of sour cream or whipped cream because we like that little bit of subtle tanginess. And to sweeten the pot, we have 2 tablespoons of sugar and a little bit of salt, 1/8 of a teaspoon. All right, simply mix this together. So we're going to let these flavors meld a little bit. They actually get better the longer it sits. So a minimum of an hour, but conveniently, our cake needs 2 hours to cool.
I have no choice. I'll wait.
All right, a promise is a promise, and we get to eat this now, okay? So it's cooled. The longest 2 hours of my life.
It may not taste good.
What?
I'm just saying. It looks great. Even if it didn't, it looks great.
But guess what?
It does taste good.
It tastes amazing. Okay. All right, so a couple of slices here.
Big for me.
All right, how's that?
Ooh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now I have to sneak back for that second one.
And here's a little bit of creme fraiche. We're going to drizzle it right on the side. How's that?
You know, there are a few moments when I'm really glad to be alive. This is one of my top 10 moments. I mean, this just looks so good.
Well, take a look at the crumb before you get it into your mouth. I mean, the crumb is still nice and light. It's got a little bit of lightness in there, but it's not too fluffy. It's almost like a little almond streusel on the top.
Excellent. So old world meets new world in our best almond cake. Everything was done in food processor. We made our almond flour with sliced blanched toasted almonds, all-purpose flour. Then instead of using a standing mixer for the eggs and sugar, which would add too much air, we did that in the food processor as well. Put that into a pan with a little sugar and almonds on top. Low oven for about an hour. And there you have it, from America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, the world's very best recipe for best almond cake. It's an A+++. Plus. Excellent. Over the last 50 years, I've been all over the map with orange juice. I grew up on Minute Maid, and then I went through more expensive options, and finally I decided to squeeze my own, which I do every morning. But I asked Jack to do a tasting to see if I go out and buy it, which might be a tad easier. So what's the story?
I've got 4 samples, Chris. You start drinking. I'm going to tell you about the big high-tech business that is orange juice. Orange juice is a $4 billion, yes, with a B,
Really?
business in the U.S., and it is incredibly high-tech. They pasteurize it, usually at fairly high temperatures, and they remove all the oxygen, then pump nitrogen into the tanks to keep it stable. That juice may be in there for 12 months before they go ahead and put it in the carton and ship it. The problem is they've removed so much flavor that when they take it out of those tanks, they blend different juices, but then they do something called adding flavor packets. Yeah, it's really not that appealing. So we did tasting with 9 different brands. We included 2 from concentrate. We found out actually that some of the frozen concentrates were better than the chilled juices. Really? The technology there has gotten better. That's always been a high-tech product, but they've gotten more natural. They've added pulp to them, and they have more of the flavor of what you would think of as a fresh juice. The winner is actually using a totally different process that is closer to natural. They're doing low temperature pasteurization. So they're at the bare minimum, 160 degrees, that will kill any nasty bugs, but minimizes flavor loss. And then the second thing they do is rather than squeezing the oranges and warehousing the juice, they put the whole oranges in climate-controlled environments and then squeeze the oranges to order. And then they ship it out 24 hours later. And we found that, in fact, it is a much fresher juice. There's now these low-calorie orange juices out on the market.